Hey comic fans, Scott Harris King here. Today I'm resuming my epic show and tell where I'm showing off my complete run of Avengers from issue 1 up until disassembled around issue 503. And today we're in 1998 with Heroes Return. We're going to be talking about the awesome Kurt Busiek, George Perez run on Avengers. So today I'm going to show you their run, issues 1 to 34. We're just going to be focusing on the main series here. And there's a lot to show off here, so let's just jump right into it. You can see here's issue 1. This is just some random bag. It says $1.50. I actually bought this off the stands. This is just some random bag I put it in. But it does have some signatures on it. Here's a signature from George Perez. Here's a signature from Kurt Busiek down below. And I also just want to show the full cover because it's George Perez at the height of his powers here, drawing everybody who's ever been an Avenger. Just such a great cover, and it was so exciting as an Avengers fan. I mean, Avengers had been not great from about issue 285. So 8 years or so, and then of course you have the absolute nadir in the mid-90s, horrible series with The Crossing, and then they end the series with Onslaught and have Rob Liefeld of all people come in with a new version, which is absolutely horrible. I showed that in the last video of my walkthrough. And so to go from that utter nonsense garbage to bringing in like one of the greatest creative teams in the history of the book, with Kurt Busiek at the absolute top of his powers in the late 90s doing Astro City, and he'd just come off of Marvels and everything, and the great George Perez. Man, it was so exciting. One thing I'm going to be talking about here a little bit throughout this video is there's been some revisionist history about the Avengers because of all the Bendis fanboys. Now, I'll save it until we get to Disassembled in a future video before I really go off on a massive rant. But you guys know I like to keep things positive on my channel. I rarely talk about negative stuff or things I don't like or whatever. But the one thing that consistently sets me off even 20 years later is anything to do with Brian Michael Bendis's New Avengers and Disassembled and that era here. And one thing that's happened is that there's all these Bendis fanboys who come in with these revisionist history claims that Avengers was a series that needed to be saved and rebooted because sales were so bad and the book was so bad. That's a load of crap. Now, the issues that are coming out right before Bendis were really bad. That's the Chuck Austin era. Again, we'll get to that in a future video. But this is just a few years before that. So that was in 2004. Here we are in 1998. This video, I'm going to be showing you the whole Kurt Busiek, George Perez run, which runs up through 2000 into 2001. And we're going to see that this was a top book. In fact, it was when this came out here, Avengers was the #1 book on the market and remained top 10, top 15 book through their whole run, and was one of the biggest and best-selling comics in the whole industry just a couple years before the Bendis reboot. I'm going to show you some evidence of that here. But let me show you some other versions of issue 1. So this is a thing called the rough cut. You can see the regular cover here is behind the sketch cover. And this is kind of a cool thing where it's issue 1, same issue, but it's all the original pencils. No inks, just basically the original pencil sketches from George Perez before they were inked. So it's really cool to see that. You see there's no word balloons or anything. And then if you go into the back of the comic, they have the original Marvel style script from Kurt Busiek. There's no dialogue in here. It's just a detailed breakdown of the pages. um, for Perez to draw from. So it's really cool. Look into the process, and of course, if you're a George Perez fan, this is something you probably want to pick up, because to see his art in the original pencil form is really cool. Now, there's also a variant cover issue. So that was one that came out like after issue 1 was such a big success, they put out that version. But at the time issue 1 came out, there were actually 2 versions. Here is the other one. Now, variant covers obviously have become a really big thing over the last, like, say 10 to 15 years, particularly with like incentive variants. But variants have been around for a while. Here we are in 1998 with 2 versions, 2 variants. This is another George Perez cover. But what people probably don't know, unless you're a really hardcore Avengers fan, is that there was actually variant covers for not just issue 1, but later issues as well, including issue 2. So here's the regular cover. This first arc was really cool. It's a little bit of a strange way to get into the series, because the Avengers had just been returned from an alternate reality where they're stuck in the Onslaught universe. And the first thing that happens is there's some sorcery from Morgan Le Fay, and they all get basically turned into alternate universe versions of themselves. So that was a little bit of a strange decision, but the story itself is really great. And here's all the sort of fantasy medieval style Avenger characters here on the regular cover of issue 2. But there was also actually a variant for issue 2. Now, when I've seen issue 2 like at back issues or whatever at conventions, I always see the regular one. But here's a really cool epic fantasy version here that's got much more of a painted feel with a castle in the background. So yeah, this is one that you don't see maybe that often. Now, I should say these variants I don't think have any particular value, but it's something an Avengers fan will definitely want to check out, is these variants. And I think there's variants in some of these other early issues too, but I don't have the other ones. All right, so here we have issue 3, and as a part of this initial storyline is the return of Wonder Man, who had been quote unquote dead for a while, but they bring him back here. I'm not a huge Wonder Man fan, so I wasn't necessarily a big fan of that. Here's another autographed issue. It is Avengers 4. Who will be on the Avengers? Is reminiscent in a way of the cover of issue 221, which also has a red background with a similar question of who's going to be on the Avengers. You can see this is signed by Kurt Busiek. It's also signed by the inker Bob Wyacek. I think he might have only inked the cover. I'm not really sure, because the inking is clearly credited to Alvey on the cover, but Wyacek had something to do with it. So that's why I have him sign that. There's a couple interesting signatures on these books. You can see a lot of signed books here. As you know, if you watch my previous Avengers videos, whenever I go to conventions, I bring stuff to get signed, and my number one rule is if they worked on Avengers in those first 500 issues, I get them to sign that first, and then only after they've signed something with Avengers do I get them to sign something else. So I have a lot of signatures here. We'll see. Here's issue 5. Kurt Busiek did a lot of stuff where he was bringing back classic Avengers characters and tropes and storylines, referencing a lot of stuff from the Bronze Age in particular. And so here he is bringing back the Squadron Supreme, who, of course, had a really big storyline a couple times in Avengers, but particularly during the Steve Englehart era. And this cover in particular is sort of an homage cover to when they faced off on the cover of Avengers 141, which the cover was done by Gil Kane, but the interior was George Perez's first issue of Avengers. So that's kind of a cool callback here. Issue 7 is sort of a one-off. It's part 4 of a crossover called Live, Cree, or Die. I don't think I have the other 3 issues of the crossover, and I don't think it really is not really important. But some stuff happens here. Warbird starts drinking, and she goes on trial, Avengers trial, for drinking on the job and endangering people. And I wasn't a big fan of that storyline either, because it felt kind of like a bit of a rehash of the Iron Man Demon in the Bottle. I do appreciate that Kurt Busiek was bringing Carol Danvers back into the Avengers. She's sort of been kind of sidelined for a long time. You know, she'd been turned into Binary, and here she comes back, and she's basically Captain Marvel, except for there's a different character already called Captain Marvel, so they called her Warbird for a while since she was a fighter pilot. So I appreciate they sort of bring Carol Danvers back out from the cold, to give her a lot of spotlight, but I didn't really love the storyline. I'm going to be saying that a lot, which is strange considering how good this run actually is. I will say uh, Busiek was doing some great stuff on Avengers, but there was some stuff that felt a little bit um, didn't quite click 100%. When you're reading Astro City at the same time, and it's like one of the greatest superhero comics ever made, then you read Avengers, where there's a lot of like going back to basics. Some of it has to do with George Perez wanting to draw certain characters, but them basically sort of going back over some old storylines. Some of it felt a little bit tired, but there's some moments of absolute greatness. Here is the introduction of a new character called Triathlon. And this begins this whole big thing that's, again, reminiscent of certain storylines in the past. There's a whole thing about them not having enough black characters or minority like members on the team, which we've seen before with the Falcon in the Bronze Age, and also with Rage in the early 90s, just a few years before this. There's also a whole thing going on where the press, the Avengers start getting hounded by the press, and they get all this bad publicity and stuff. And that was the storyline for old Avengers fans that we've seen before, way back during the Cap's Kooky Quartet days. That was on the table. So, sort of a greatest hits thing here. Here is issue 9, Return of Moses Magnum, who was not sure had been seen since he was in X-Men way back in the mid 70s. This is another cool throwback. This is an issue of particular interest to me. It's issue 10. It's this is just before they start having the big media issues where they're still super popular, and they have Avengers Day in New York City. And a couple things about this issue. The first one is that Avengers Day, again, is basically a celebration of the Avengers that had happened way back in the Silver Age a couple times. During the Cap's Kooky Quartet era was the first Avengers Day issue, but also after that, when Roy Thomas took over, I think it's issue 45 with the Super Adaptoid. That's another story that takes place during an Avengers Day celebration. So this is Kurt having fun with continuity. Kurt's, knows everything about Marvel continuity, but he usually does it in a much more sort of organic, fun way than some of the real continuity wonks. The other thing about this issue is that at the time these were coming out, I was part of a group online called the Avengers Mailing List, which was an old school actual mailing list where people would email, and it would send it to 150 people or whatever, and we talk about Avengers. And Kurt Busiek was in the group. He joined the group right around the time the first issue came out, maybe a little bit before that. I'm not sure. And was participated quite a bit in those. And in this issue, there's a character in here who is named for one of the people in the Avengers mailing list. So it was really exciting to see. There's actually a couple people in the story that are named after different people that were prominent members of the Avengers mailing list. So it was really cool to see that sort of nod to the mailing list there. Here's issue 11, where we have the Legion of the Undead, or whatever they're called. Again, a team that had appeared way back in like Avengers 134 or so, maybe a little before that, 132. So again, Englehart era, um, sort of bringing that concept back. So here's something I want to note: 1998 Wizard Fan Award winner, favorite writer, Kurt Busiek. Just making a note of that. Again, there's been a bit of a revisionist history where the Bendis apologists talk about how bad the book was and how they needed the sales boost. And I just want to remind people that here we are, just basically 5 years before that reboot, and they're winning the big fan awards for favorite writer, and it's also still a top 10 seller every month. And we're going to see more of that throughout the whole run. Here's issue 12. Now, this is a crossover with Thunderbolts that Kurt Busiek was also writing at the time, which is a great series. This is an issue where Hawkeye ends up leaving the Avengers a little bit before this, I think, and to go over to Thunderbolts and try and reform them. His idea is basically, hey, the Avengers helped me reform and turn into a hero when I was considered a villain. Maybe these people are just misguided. I can help turn them into actual heroes. So then we have 13. There was a whole thing going on in this series about Justice from the New Warriors wanting to be an Avenger, and how he wanted his whole life to be an Avenger, and this whole thing about him. He's sort of supposed to be our. He and Firebird are supposed to be our eyes. That's not the right word. They're basically the fan avatars. Like as fans, we want to join the Avengers or whatever. And so he's this fanboy that joins the Avengers. Whereas Firebird's not that interested in joining the Avengers. She's just going along because because he wants to do it so much. And so she's sort of an outsider looking at the Avengers without these rose-colored glasses and seeing everything that's sort of off about the Avengers. And so they end up joining the team, but they have that sort of dynamic throughout these issues where she's reluctantly joining and he's gung-ho and makes mistakes because he's so into it and stuff like that. I'm not a big fan of the characters. So with issue 14, we get this Beast Wonder Man thing where Wonder Man's back from the dead, so Beast comes to see him. Of course, the Beast Wonder Man pairing was a big highlight of the late 70s, so it's nice to sort of acknowledge that. Here's issue 15. There's this whole thing I can't really explain too well, but it has to do with there's this guy Lord Pagan, a Lord Templar, and a character named Pagan, and they're fighting each other, and they have something to do with this cult that Triathlon and a couple other characters in the series are part of. It's like a church, and that's a running subplot throughout the series that goes on for a long time. That's not resolved until after issue 50. So you can see it's building right from when Triathlon first appears in issue 8 and runs for several years. Now we have some fill-in issues here. There's a 3-part fill-in here. I think Perez was getting a little behind, and they were working on this big Ultron storyline, which will come right after this. So there's a 3-parter here by Jerry Ordway. So I've got this autographed by Ordway and by Tom Smith, who I think might have done inks or something on it. I used to know why everyone signed these, but I don't really remember. That was 16. Here's 17. You see Carol in her old costume. There's a couple characters here wearing their older costumes. Here's 18 with the Wrecking Crew. Again, these are all signed by Jerry Ordway, Tom Smith. So we have this little 3-part sort of breather where Busiek and Perez are getting ahead of things while they have these fill-in issues. And they're good. I mean, Jerry Ordway's always good, right? Then we come back with one of the highlights of the whole run, one of the best stories that Busiek did during his run, and probably the best story that the team of Busiek and Perez did, and it's an Ultron story. Now, it starts in issue 19, however, it actually starts here. It is Avengers number 0. which was, as you can see, it's a Wizard special, and it says at the top, Ultron Unlimited Prelude. So this came with issues of Wizard magazine. Some of the zero issues are one half issues that Wizard used to do. You had to send away for, but this actually came with the magazine. And so this is the prelude to it. The cover is not by Perez, but the next issue has maybe Perez's most iconic cover. To me, super iconic. Ultron, one of the, Ultron and Kang are the two big Avengers enemies. I would put the Masters of Evil sort of a distant third behind those two. And this is an absolute classic cover. Starts this great Ultron storyline that has some just great moments in it. The moment at the end of the first issue, they spend the whole first issue fighting this Ultron, and they end up defeating him. And then, like, more Ultrons show up. And, the whole thing with Ultron is he's got the numbering. Every time he rebuilds himself, he's one. So at this point, I forget, they were on Ultron 16, maybe. And then these other Ultrons show up, and they've got numbers on them. And one of them comes, like, through the wall or whatever, and it says 453 or something like that on it. And the Avengers are like, oh crap. And then there's just like hundreds of Ultrons. It's so great. But then more famously, we'll get to it in a minute here. Here's issue 20. Here's the Ultron Unlimited storyline. Really great classic Avengers storyline here. One thing that Busiek did is, again, he was going back to the well for a lot of classic Avenger stuff. He was adding some of his own new stuff too, but he was definitely anchoring the book in the stuff that made Avengers great in the 60s and 70s and 80s, right? And as a result, he ended up with like doing one of the great Ultron storylines, but he also did Kang, and for my money, maybe the two best Kang stories of all time. Now, those were not with Perez, so I'm not showing them today. But really great stuff. And so here's the end of Ultron Unlimited with this great cover, Ultron having defeated everybody. And there's a great moment at the end of this story that's really famous, where the Avengers smash through Ultron. It seems like he's about to win, and then some Avengers smash through the wall, and Thor's there, and he says, Ultron, I would have words with thee. It's so great. It's so great. One of the like most famous Avengers moments. So great storyline here. Now that story did have a little bit of controversy because it got into sort of one thing that Busiek did that I'm not sure how I feel about. I kind of don't like it. Is he basically, because he was sort of going back to the resetting things in a way to sort of the old status quo from back in the day, he basically got Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne back together. Of course, they had been divorced since the early 80s, so like over 15 years in the comics, and he got them back together, and there was some stuff in that storyline about their relationship that didn't sit well with everybody. So I just wanted to mention that. The other thing that he did that I didn't like is, I'm a big fan of Vision. I'm not a huge fan of Wonder Man. They did a lot of stuff here with this romantic triangle between the three, which again was teased way back in the 70s, was really explored a lot in West Coast Avengers a few years before this. I'm not a big fan of the Scarlet Witch, so I like some of the stuff that Busiek did with Vision, but I would have preferred the spotlight to be more on Vision and less on the Scarlet Witch and less on Wonder Man. But here we are, issue 24. We're a year on from the last time we had the Wizard Awards, but here it is on the cover again, 1999, so a year later. Wizard Fan Award winner. Now, last time we had Busiek won Best Writer. This time it's Best Writer. Kurt Busiek wins again, but also George Perez wins this time as Best Penciler. So as this series is going along, actually, in addition to sales still being good, they're actually getting more and more critical acclaim as they go. So they've gone from winning Best Writer to now winning both Best Writer and Best Artist. And this is issue 24. Here's issue 25, which is an anniversary issue. It's kind of an interesting premise. You see Juggernaut back here, and Juggernaut gets his powers from Sidorak for whatever. Basically, this storyline introduces the idea that there's this whole pantheon of these creatures, gods, whatever beings like Sidorak, and that they each have an avatar, and that Juggernaut's just one of them. And there's creatures that they basically have different power sets, but they're just as powerful as Juggernaut, but in different ways. And so in this one, those people come for Juggernaut, and the Avengers actually have to try and save him. Here's issue 26. This is Stuart Immonen. Perez, notoriously not that fast with the pencils. This was one of his first real big high-profile gigs in years and years and years, because he had been having trouble keeping up with the pencils. And we've already seen some fill-in issues here. We're just 2 years in. And we're in the last year of his run as a regular artist, because it's going to get to be too much. But here's issue 27, which is really cool. It's a 100-page giant. They did a month here in, what's the date on this? Don't know. But I think it was in 99. I'm going to look at the date. But basically, Marvel did a month where all of the comics were 100-page giants. It's odd. I don't really see these around that much. It's not like I'm running into these. And it may be because sales across the board of comics were fairly low at that time, so there's just not as many copies bouncing around. This is actually cover dated April 2000, so it would have come out probably in January of 2000. But yeah, they did a whole month of 100-page giants. That some of the stories in here, this is a story about the Old Order Changeth. That's one of these issues where the whole issue is about the Avengers changing their lineup. And so in the back of this, they reprinted a little bit of an odd choice, but they reprinted issue 150. And what's odd about that is issue 150 is about them changing their lineup, but they had a deadline doom with issue 150 where they only put out part of the issue, and then the rest of that issue was a reprint of issue 16. So this is reprinting issue 150, and inside of that is a sub reprint of issue 16. And then they also have, I think, the beginning of issue 151, because that's when the story ends. There's a couple other reprints in here, including issue 101. So it's a cool issue to get if you don't have the originals, you want to brush up on the Avengers history, or it's just cool to get 100 pages, you know? Speaking of cool, one thing I didn't mention is this character named Silverclaw, who's going to be on the cover in a little bit. But this is a whole story about her. She's 28. Silverclaw is this character from South America who becomes Jarvis's ward, basically. So she moves into Avengers Mansion. She's got superpowers. And finally, and she's been around for quite a while in this run. Finally, in this issue, we get a storyline spotlighting her, and it's all about Kulan Gath. And Kulan Gath, a wizard from the Conan era and from Kull the Conqueror, has fought the Avengers before, though, because there's been a couple times where he's come into the present before. My favorite being X-Men 190 and 191. Great storyline about Kulan Gath turning Manhattan into this Conan-esque fantasy city. And so here we have a storyline with Kulan Gath. Issue 29. You can see he's done the same thing, I guess, to something in South America. I haven't read this in quite a while. You see it says here, a nation lost to time. And then here on the cover of number 30, we have Silverclaw fighting Kulan Gath. So some really cool stories here. 31, Vision's been out of the book for a while since that last issue where he's on the cover. He comes back here. Again, Busiek's doing some kind of interesting things with the Vision, but it never really kind of pays off the way that I want it to. But we start the storyline. We got Madame Mask. Now, one thing he's doing here, speaking of continuity, there was this thing right after the crossing, but before Onslaught, where Madame Mask was in some stories with the team, and then Onslaught happened, and there was no resolution to that. And so here we are, years later now, like 5 years later. Kurt Busiek is tying up that continuity loose end with Madame Mask, and he's bringing back the Grim Reaper. Black Widow, I think, is in this. So you got another book here. Now, I think I forgot to mention that. So still credited to Perez here, right? But you can see that in addition to Kurt Busiek's signature in the middle, it's also I also have this signed by the late Paul Ryan, who was a regular Avengers artist for a long time, 100 issues before this, right? Back around, he became the regular artist, I think it was issue 305, and was a regular artist for a couple years there, right? So if you read this, the breakdowns are from Perez, but the pencils are actually Paul Ryan over Perez breakdowns. So we're getting to the end of the Perez era. He's not able to keep up with the monthly demands here. And so this continues here. Here's another one that I have signed by both Busiek and Paul Ryan. And here they're fighting Count Nefaria, which makes sense because Madame Mask is involved with the Magia, as is Count Nefaria. Of course, Nefaria is a classic Avengers villain that first appeared in Avengers 13 and then had a great storyline in 164 to 166. And then I'm just looking at the credits here. Yeah, so this is credited to Busiek and Perez. Alvey's credit on here is not just inks, though. It's inks and finishes. So it's somewhere, but like it's not, I guess, enough for him to get the full pencil credit like Paul Ryan did in the previous issue, but it's enough where he's getting a finish credit. So Perez, again, he's not able to do the full thing. And this is his last issue on the book here. So it's a double size finale, as it says here, where we tie up that era. So that's the great run. But one thing that I wanted to mention here about 34, you might have caught it when you were just looking at it, but let's show it again. We've already seen the 1998 Wizard Award winner, Kurt Busiek, Best Writer. 1999, Kurt Busiek, Best Writer, and George Perez, Best Penciler. And here, 2000, we get 2000 Wizard Fan Award winner, Best Series, Best Artist, George Perez, Best Moment, The Avengers Confront Ultron. So strangely, Busiek doesn't get the writer here, even though it's now listed as Best Series and Best Moment. But we get here the 2000 Wizard Awards, Avengers, Busiek and Perez, voted by the fans, Best Series. And you'll note this is just 4 years before Marvel cancels the series and completely reboots it with Bendis. So we've still got a ways to go with Busiek, but Perez is off the book. Next time around, I'm going to show the rest of the Busiek run without Perez. So it'll be issues 35 to 57. I think maybe 56. So a shorter one, but also in that video, I'm going to show you the other stuff that Busiek did, the other Avengers stories that he did that were outside of the main series at the same time, because they're super important to understanding the legacy of this era. Because at the same time he was doing these, he was doing Avengers Forever, an awesome 12-part miniseries with Carlos Pacheco art. And then after the end of this, when Perez left, he went to do the 4-part Avengers JLA crossover, which Busiek also wrote. So that's what I'm going to show you next time. I'm going to show you the last 20 issues of the Busiek run on Avengers, but also we'll talk about Avengers Forever. We'll talk about Avengers JLA, 2 other spin-off series that were also like #1 top-selling books, and were most importantly, we're going to talk next time about Kurt Busiek's magnum opus on Avengers, the Kang Dynasty storyline, which starts in issue 41 and runs all the way to issue 54, over a full year of issues, and just, for me, the best Kang story of all time. And not for nothing, Avengers Forever 1 through 12, also one of the best Kang stories of all time. So Kang's my favorite supervillain, so next time's going to be really exciting because I get to talk all about Kang and some of my favorite Kang stories ever. Let me know what you think of this down below, what you think of this run here. It was a run that had some amazing moments and was consistently good writing and excellent art. And yet, at a lot of times during this part of the run, I felt slightly disappointed because even though it was very, very good, I had such huge expectations for it because of Astro City, that I wanted it to be even better. In retrospect, again, Busiek ends up with, I would say, probably writing 4 all-time classic Avengers storylines, which is the Ultron Unlimited, the Kang Dynasty, Avengers Forever, and Avengers JLA. Not everyone loves that. We'll talk about that next time. But so in retrospect, he had like hit a bunch of home runs, but when these were coming out, I was kind of like, this religious stuff I don't really care for. I don't really care for the new characters that are on the team. I didn't really love the stuff with the being hounded by the media and all of that stuff. Don't like Wonder Man. So there was a lot of stuff where I was like, it's really good, but I was hoping for something a little bit different. In the end, turns out to be one of the best Avengers runs of all time. So what do you think about it down below? Let me know, and I'll see you next time.